Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to episode 5 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode of the Stray Pointers podcast was recorded on October 4th, 2023. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For links to items referenced in the podcast, please see the show notes for this episode at straypointers.com. Hey, tonight our guest is software engineer, electronic wizard, musician, and all-around good guy, James Christie. I told you I was going to call you an electronics wizard.
Yeah.
James,
Thank
welcome.
you, sir.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So
it's going to be good.
So this episode is one of a planned series where I'd like to interview users and system operators of electronic bulletin board systems or BBSs
Sure.
that around the area, around the world. I just like to interview as many folks as I can. I just happen to know a lot of folks from the area, so there's going to be a kind of high density of these, if I can get them together, of users and sysops of BBSs from the Omaha, Nebraska area. So, James, I thought we'd start before we actually get into your usage of BBSs in the Omaha area. You were into
Sure.
tech before you hit your first BBS. Why don't you give us a little background on your technical upbringing? How did your interest in computers start?
Sure. I think initially I had and nobody's going to know what this thing is when I say it was a Texas Instruments TI-99 4A that I got in middle school when I was, in middle school. But that was my first introduction to programming, and got to learn the basic. Found out they had TI Extended Basic. I kind of hit the cap on that. That computer kind of went away. I got into PC programming as far as Borland, C++, and then not because I wanted to, but I had to get into assembler programming, but because there was no solution in C++ for what I was trying to do. So
okay, so let's back up just a second.
Yeah, let's okay. Yep.
You had to get into assembler programming. Tell me a little more about that.
Well, I think what I was trying to do at the time, and this might be jumping the gun, but I was working on a video Kino application.
Okay.
I don't know if you recall the MS-DOS days.
Maybe
you do.
Yep.
Where there was you had Sound Blaster and AdLib. Those were the two options for sound. If you wanted any of your applications to have sound, you needed to have one or preferably both of those. And at the time that I was building some apps for shareware purposes, there were no third-party libraries like there are today. So you had to kind of figure it out. It was a brute force attempt at programming sound for the MS-DOS PC.
Sure. Okay.
So it
was
fun, but stressful times where you're just like, it was, like I said, it was brute force where you tried something, didn't work, tried it again, didn't work, tried it again, and finally it worked. So
what was this under a formal curriculum, or were you buying books and magazines to do this?
At that time there was no formal curriculum that I was aware of, so it was just basically buying an assembler book and trying to figure this out on my own. And there likely was resources that I did not that I was not aware of, but
okay, so at some point you got a modem.
Or did
the modem come with the PC?
No, the modem got installed in the PC. Yeah. And okay. I think we talked about this previously, but my initial modem, I had watched those Jason Scott
the BBS documentary.
Yep, absolutely. And they're talking about 300 baud, and I'm like, I had a 2400 baud, so you guys are like so far in the past. But that's where I kind of entered the picture, was it around the 2400 baud era. And,
was this something then that came with the PC that you bought, or did you recognize the need for it somehow and buy it as an add-on?
I bought it as an add-on, not knowing what I needed it for. So it
Okay.
was
Was this an impulse buy?
oh, everything is. Yeah, yep. Yes, it
Okay.
was. Yeah.
Okay. Now, um, my first BBS that I visited was in 1984, and it was the way that I found it was listed in a national magazine at the time. I want to say it was Creative Computing, but for the life of me, I've searched the archives that they've got on archive.org, and I can't find that particular issue that would have that in there. So it must have been
Let's
something else, but it was in a tech magazine.
yeah, that's like something that I've been thinking about since we talked about this a week or two ago
Hmm.
is how did you first stumble across your first BBS? And I was like, I have no idea. I can't, it was, it was 30 some years ago. I can't recall exactly how that came to be, but once you stumbled upon one BBS, they were very good about, you know, here's a list of other numbers in your area that
Sure,
you can connect to. So,
sure.
so
So when you did stumble on this, were you a high school student at this time?
I was probably freshly out of high school. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. So this is the early 90s that we're talking about then.
yeah, I'd say early, and then my BBS experience extends probably through the mid '90s until things,
Okay.
you know,
So
kind of superseded those.
so I think in the Omaha area at the time, if you were hitting PC-based bulletin boards, if you were an MS-DOS PC enthusiast,
Yep.
uh, you were probably hitting a BBS that ran PC board, Spitfire, Wildcat, or something along those lines. And there
Or
were
all of the above. I think
sure,
I think I think we've hit them all. Yep. Yep.
and the a number of those were able to run through desk view or other things. They were able to run multiple instances on multiple modems, so there was no waiting and things like that. So, um,
Right.
what sort of things did you do on the BBSs that what did you get out of using a BBS?
Well, I think if you talk to any of the sysops, they would probably I don't know if I'd be called a leech or what, but I was most concerned in the downloads and as far as downloading shareware games and things of that sort. I know that there were there options as far as chat. I don't want to chat with random people, so I didn't do that. So, but
Okay,
it was mostly the shareware games and things of that sort. So,
okay. Did you some of these boards that were in the area at the time,
yep, yep.
they started to be for pay. Did you go on a pay board or did you use the free services?
I would be the free services kid. Yeah. So
Okay, okay. What terminal program was your terminal program of choice? Do you remember this?
that's a great question. Remember your favorite terminal from 35 years ago? No, sir, I do not recall. I I know that I stored them in that terminal program, and I had just a dot matrix printout of my favorite BBSs. And you know, as you would find some new one, I'd write it at the bottom, update my text file printer out again, and
Okay.
go from there. But
Okay. Well, some of the ones that I was using at the time were the one that came with my modem, one of my modems. I had started out at 300 baud, but on a
yeah,
on Commodore 8-bit gear.
yeah,
When in the PC era, I had gotten some modems. I had a 2400, but one of the faster ones I got was a 14.4 kilobaud gateway telepath modem, and I believe it came with Q modem, which had
okay.
been a shareware program at the time. And then the folks at Wildcat bought the rights to it, and I was just a 4Pay Q modem user after that. I thought that was just one of the better ones.
No,
Uh,
I mean going from 2400 to 14.4 was like night and day. It's like I own this thing now because now I'm like, it was that
one
was a
of the
big deal. That was a big
one
deal.
one of the other terminal programs that was popular though was Procom Plus or PC Plus, uh, which is very likely what you were using because a lot of times that came with new modems too. I think you'd
That
either get Procom Plus, you'd get Q modem
That
with the new
sounds
modem.
familiar. Yes, yes, sir. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you downloaded shareware games, but you also mentioned earlier in the podcast here that you had authored some shareware software. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Oh,
What
sure,
was
sure.
what was one of the pieces of software that you had marketed on
Well,
bulletin boards?
primarily it was a video Kino game. If you're familiar with Kino,
Yep.
it's a video version of that. Um, and as well as the game itself, I wrote a bunch of utilities, or not a bunch, a couple, to help me in that endeavor. There was at the time, as far as Borderlands C++ was concerned, if you wanted to import external graphics, they had to be in a certain format.
Mhm.
So I had a graphics creator, which caught on like wildfire. Like I think I sold 0.0 copies of it, but it was it was basically, you know, creating sprites that you would use in whatever C++ programs you had, and save those off to files that you'd be able to import to C++. So
And then you use this in your Keynote program.
correct, correct, yeah.
And how well did that do
Did the graphics
financially?
editor work? Oh,
Well, no, the financially, how did it
oh,
finance any of your vast
uh,
guitar collection or
no, no, no. It I brought in tens of dollars,
tens
tens
of
of dollars.
dollars?
Yes,
Well, that's better than
and it
no dollars.
well, it's until you start receiving checks 5 years after you wrote the thing, and you're like, I don't want to support this anymore.
Yep, yep.
But that's the situation I was in there, and
What so
go ahead,
so
go ahead.
you use the BBSs to kind of as your marketing vehicle for this. Yes, you uploaded it to
Correct,
local
correct.
BBSs.
Yeah, I mean, for a couple years, I had been a shareware consumer, and I was like, oh, this is kind of a good business model. I'll create my own software and put it out on local BBSs. And I was surprised. It's been, maybe 2, 3 months, and I looked out on the internet, and some of the things that I created 30 years ago are available for download. And I hope they don't send a check to my mom's house, but it was
I would doubt that they
for
would.
$7.50. Yeah.
So, did you use any national facilities? There were, the local BBSs in the
Yep.
latter part of the 80s and the early 90s, they had some international networking in some cases, like through FidoNet or
Right.
the
Right.
RelayNet International Mail Echo, and Spitfire had SFNet, and I think a slightly different one. And FidoNet is probably the one that most people have heard about, and
Sure. Sure.
it's nothing compared to what we can do today, but it was kind of a novelty back in the day to be able to post a message to someone and get a reply from someone in Australia a day or two later.
Yeah. Um, I probably, and this is like me remembering 30 years ago, but uploaded to BBSs that were local,
Okay.
that were hopefully FidoNet involved, that helped the distribution of that. So
Okay. Did you ever post messages on these national boards?
I didn't. And I felt like that topic was going to come up, and I felt like, oh man, I'm just an introvert who doesn't want to talk to people on the other side of the world. But that's the way it was when I was, you know, 20 years old, whatever it was back then.
So what about some of the national for pay online services like CompuServe or Genie or
Yeah.
places like that?
CompuServe is where I went next, and I think they had I can't recall the name of them, but I believe it preceded or coincided with Usenet groups. Um,
Yeah, they
and
had special interest groups. They would call them SIGs.
yeah, yeah,
And
and I think I was also a lurker or a leech on those as well. I mean, I don't know that I contributed a lot, or as far as like commenting or asking questions, but
well, they
there could
also
have been some questions in there that, I may have asked, like, how do you do this in assembler,
oh, okay.
Sound Blaster card, and
Well, in addition to their own SIGs, they also at one point had Usenet newsgroup access. So you could
That's
have
where
done
it
both.
got good, right? I mean, Usenet, that's where things kind of exploded, right? I mean, once you had Usenet access, you were
Yeah,
in the game at that
uh,
point.
yep. And at the time, I was still using CompuServe with the primitive text-oriented interface, but I think that there were third-party front ends to it, and then they had started to develop their own CompuServe interface manager that was like a more of a graphical front end as Windows started to take over, and it became
Sure.
easier to use those sorts of things. It was a little more like the browser we have now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And
So.
I think that's where I kind of fell away from the BBSs is like once you get into CompuServe and you have this at your disposal,
Mhm.
perhaps the BBSs weren't at the forefront of your mind. If you had like 2 hours, what am I going to do? Am I going to go cruise the local BBSs or am I going to reach out to a larger audience and see
Sure,
what's out there? So
sure. So pretty soon then, for me, CompuServe sort of gave way to the internet. They were, I get my monthly magazine from CompuServe, and in one of those, I got a diskette with Trumpet Windsock, and they had, I can't remember if it was, I think it was SLIP. That was the dial-up protocol that you could use with Trumpet Windsock, and then they had Spyglass. Spyglass, was that the browser? There was an older browser
it's like
that
Netscape 0.99. I don't know if there was
it
something that preceded that, but
yeah, it was a precursor to that. And then at that point, I got on the early internet, and right about that time, a number of the local BBSs were either shuttering their doors or they were becoming internet service providers. Like
right.
I know the online pit stop, which was a local Omaha BBS, that became top.net,
Okay.
and they became an ISP. So did you jump right on to the internet bandwagon?
Is it bad if I say I did? But yes,
No,
yes.
this isn't a court where I'm taking the side
Okay.
of the
Okay.
former BBS sysops on why they no longer have systems. So
No, no.
this is fine. It was kind of the natural way of things, I think,
Well, it
at
was
least in the
like
area.
yeah, like you said, it was a natural evolution, I think, from local to like an extended network where you had resources beyond what we could support locally. So
So would it surprise you if I told you that there are people running telnettable BBSs today?
it would only because yes, yes.
They there are some folks actually running BBSs, oftentimes on the original hardware with an augmentation to connect to the internet. There's actually devices that the modern devices that they make that plug into the ports where modems would normally go, and the BBSs don't really know a whole lot more than they're getting what appears to be a modem feed. As people are
Okay.
telnetting into them, it makes them appear to be ringing and things like that. So there's folks all over who have set up BBSs on old 8-bit gear and 16-bit gear and that sort of thing.
Or pies? Are we talking like we could
Yeah,
yep,
yeah,
yep.
absolutely. They've just all sorts of things, and in some cases they can run them on modern gear too. There's some Java-based BBSs. I don't know that all of them get used heavily, but
Right.
at least the ones that I've tried to visit, it doesn't appear that they get a lot of calls when I'm on there. But
Right.
and it's the same kind of busy signals and things like that we used to have to wait for because some of them would only have one port open, and if somebody's telling it into it, no one else can get in. So you're back to getting a busy signal again.
Yeah, that would be interesting to experience. So no,
Yeah. Does it make you want to run your own telnet BBS?
I can do that. Yeah, yeah.
Or you're going to do it on a Pi though, aren't you?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. What haven't we talked about that we need to cover?
I do you want to talk about shareware and not so much my shareware, but I was reading about your experiences and maybe you don't, maybe it's
Sure.
not the protocol for the interviewee to turn it around on the interviewer,
I
but I would
it
like to talk about what you've got going on there and what you accomplished. I
yeah,
said I
it's
earned tens of dollars, and I think you did a bit better. So yeah,
yeah. So oddly enough, my first piece of shareware was for the Spitfire BBS. There were some local sysops that were running Spitfire, and people were writing add-ons for Spitfire and things like that, and door games. Did you ever play door games? You ever play Legend of the Red Dragon or any of? Did you get into any of those?
I think I started and I thought it was boring. So sorry for
Yeah, I wasn't big on the games, but usually
right.
if you talk to people of the 90s era BBS scene, that's
Yeah,
generally what they cling to, and that's what a lot of these Telnet BBSs run. But anyway,
sure, sure.
back to what we were talking about here. Somebody had mentioned in one of the sysops had mentioned that it would have been nice if he had kind of a way to do frequently asked questions in his sysop chat, because there were a lot of things. He said, it'd be nice if I could just hit F5 and have a particular
Sure.
string pop out. So I wrote a keyboard macro utility specifically for this guy, and it allowed you to, when it's basically a very specialized version of auto hotkey, where if you could assign one of the function keys or any key combination really, um, a value of text, and what it would do then would be logically type that text on your MS-DOS machine. So if you're in a chat mode, this guy could assign his F5 to, oh yes, if you need to download files, the Z modem protocol is the best, or something along
Sure.
those lines.
Sure. Sure.
It hit F5 and spit that out. So I put it out. It was not restricted in any way, and I charged $3 for it, and put it out there. This guy says this is great, and he never paid for it. And I did get one or two people sent me a check for $3 in the mail. One of the guys told me that he used it for everything. He used it outside the BBS. He used it as a general macro utility. He loved it. He got his $3 worth. And
Sure.
another guy had problems with it, and I had to make a long distance phone call at the time, which
Oh,
this
there
was
goes your $3. There
yeah,
goes your
there
three
there
bucks,
you
man.
go. I spent well more than that $3 on that long
Yeah.
distance call. So okay, so I hung it up for a while. Some years later in 1997, I was playing with a compiler for a language called awk, and uh, I had solicited. I'd done some writing for some tech magazines, so I'd solicited Dr. Dobbs' journal. I'd like to do a in their examining room column. I'd like to examine this awk compiler. It was Thomson Automation awk, or TAWK, TAWK. And as part of the code that I wrote for that, I wanted to do something that was outside of the normal text processing that awk is known for. And this particular version had access to the Windows API. So I thought, well, it's the internet age. I'll write something with TCP IP. So I
Yeah.
made a client for the finger protocol, which is a really simple TCP protocol handler. And that was published in this particular issue of Dr. Dobbs' journal. And I got to thinking, I could probably turn this command line finger client into a command line email sender client. I know a little bit. I've read a little bit about the SMTP protocol. So I
Yeah.
ended up building a little program called Mail Send, and it could send mail. And you put a text file out there, and there's a particular command line you could use. And these are much more common. And in fact, when I built this, there were some already out there. But I did this. I put it out on some bulletin boards, and there happened to be a lot of very good ones geared toward the shareware author at the time. And I did get a few checks in the mail for my $10, and I thought, well, this is great. In fact, I
Right.
got one from Sweden, and this is back before really communicating with people worldwide was just not a thing yet, even though the internet was available. So I kept that letter with the Swedish postage and all that kind of stuff for a while. One guy from France sent me my $10 as cash. So a $10 bill in US funds made it unscathed, undamaged by thieves who might be working around the postal department from France over to Southwest Iowa, where I was living at
That
the time.
that is impressive.
It is. So uh, I joined one of those Usenet groups with some other shareware authors, and they basically were telling me, well, you got to have a credit card processor. People will impulse buy if you have a credit card processor.
Right.
And I got one, and I sold 2 copies that night. So they were right, and that's when it really exploded. The model of send me a check. Yeah, there's a few honest individuals, but well, it's not that they're even dishonest if they're on the other side of that coin. It's that people tend to procrastinate, and it's
Sure,
harder
sure.
to write a check later and get it mailed out than it is to just pull out your card and do something online. And that's what these guys who were making real money at the time tried to tell me. And so over time, I sold an application called MailSend, which sent mail from the command line, an application called Mail Grab that would retrieve mail from the command line, a couple of utilities I dashed off because my customers for the first two were saying, do you have a scheduling piece of software, a scheduler that I could use to schedule these? And do you have something, because this was in the dial-up networking days, that I can force to hang up the internet phone connection? And so I dashed those off about 20 minutes a piece on a Sunday afternoon. And on each of those, for some reason, I lucked into some bulk contracts for $2,000 or $3,000 in sales just on those alone, on these apps that all one of them did was hang up the phone, and all the other one did was wait
So
till a certain
you
time.
you sent an ATH0 and you made thousands? Is that
Actually, it is if you go out to mailsend-online.com
yep.
and look through the articles there, the C code is there. It's a little simpler, but it's along those lines. There's Windows has a subsystem called RAS for remote access, and there is a RAS enum connections, and you for loop through this list of connections. And I think I just hung up the first connection. There's a function you can call to, it's either RAS terminate connection or RAS hang up or something like that. We're not talking about more than 15 lines of C code here. And yeah, it made several $1,000s compared to the hours and hours that I put in on the mail sending and the mail receiving and putting in attachments and decoding attachments and all this sort of thing.
Well, that's impressive that you made money on the small things, but like things that you dedicated your life to for weeks or months, you got $8 out of it. But
Well, I actually made money on those. It's just that
yeah,
it was just the scale was not balanced as far as the amount of time that I put into the amount of
sure,
dollars
sure.
that I made. And then over time I had built some more utilities, but as we were talking earlier, the ones that I had tried to build for the consumer audience never went anywhere. In entertainment software or personal productivity, anything like that, it was usually
Right.
something where it was for either software developers or power users that were automating something. So I'd had scripting languages, screen capture programs, all sorts of different things like that. And over a period of time, it was fairly easy. The registration processor I had, RegSoft, they made it very easy because I didn't have to do anything in order to fulfill these. There was an automated email that would come out to help the people get the registered versions after they paid for them.
Was
So
it a digital download that you provided, or was it like a diskette that you had to stick
no,
in the mail?
it was all download. I didn't
Okay, okay,
I didn't personally do that, but RegSoft had another service where if they wanted to order a CD with a particular piece of software for an
sure.
extra $14, they would press a CD and send it to them. I saw a small chunk of that, but not they made the money on that, not me. But what it amounted to was I didn't use registration codes because I was trying to keep these hassle free.
Sure,
And
sure.
so once you registered, there'd just be a URL to the registered version. And they could go download that version, which didn't have the nag screen in it, and a limit of about 10 emails that I had put in the trial version. And that's what,
Yeah.
that's what they would use. I found that you had to do something though in order to get paid.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
the first
And
versions
there's
of MailSend didn't have any of that. I still got a little money. It's hard for me to tell if when I put the protections in, if that's what got me my money, because I also added attachments at the same time, and that might have been a feature that people were waiting for. But I will tell you, when I put the nag in and the limit, that's when I started getting a lot of registrations.
and there was a fine line between how much you nag people, correct? I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like you
Yeah. Um,
can't give a 3-minute nag screen and expect people to they would just
no, what it
desert
amounted
you.
to,
Yeah.
what it amounted to was I would insert a message into the emails that said this email was sent with an unregistered version of MailSend.
Yep.
And I had a particular I had a particularly tricky um, limit because you could just keep running. It wasn't that you had to send no more than 10 mails in one invocation of the software. I left some residue in Windows so that if you tried to send one email and then another with a separate invocation of the command line, if you kept doing that, eventually 10 of them, it would say, well, you can't send any more until you reboot Windows. And so
Okay.
that's what they'd have to do. And I did have people contact me and say, how do I make this work? Do I have to pay the $10 to make this work for, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
please. Yeah.
And I had seen a post on a Usenet forum from someone who didn't want to pay the $10. And I replied to them, I'm trying to understand the position here. $10 can be a lot of money depending on what part of the world you're in. I just like to understand. I thought I put this down at a pretty reasonable price. And at some point, my customers told me, you're not charging enough. I'm going to buy 2 copies, but I'm only using one. So I doubled the price to $20 and nobody blinked an eye.
Did you have issues with people cracking your software or modifying
Um,
it and
yep.
redistributing it? Yeah.
Yep. I think MailSend was harder because it used, and MailGrab because I used that awk compiler. And a lot of these guys cracking the software at the time were very conscious of how the C compilers of the day and C++ compilers generated code. And I think they could walk through that. I think the awk compiler helped throw them for a loop because it
Okay.
was an interpreter within that. There was a wallpaper utility that was cracked almost as soon as I released it. And I knew I'd made it at that point. Hey,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
somebody cracked my software.
yeah.
There was another that in the nag message that I would put in mail send, there was a crack to remove that. They couldn't figure out how to remove the 10 item limit, but they removed the nag message. So in the next version of that, I had encrypted the nag message and they couldn't find it anymore. And that, as far as I know, that was that.
Okay. 30 some year ago, me apologizes for cracking nag screens for you and other shareware. So.
was did you get a hold of mine? Now I know who it
No,
was.
no, I don't believe it had anything to do with yours, but
Yeah,
that was
I
another
don't know that.
pastime of mine was just, you know, running executables through a debugger and finding
Sure,
out where these nag screens were coming from and
sure.
no-opping them out or not
Y-
not distributing that crack to the internet, but just for my own personal use. If
Yeah,
it's
yeah. I did it differently based on the application. There was a tool I built that, if you think about it, was really similar to an installer utility called Command to Exe. And what it would do is the intent was to take a batch file and package it up in an exe so that when you ran the exe, it
yep,
would
yep,
drop the batch file in a folder and run it. And you could have other resources in there too, like if you needed
sure,
sound files or other things. So in a way, I think you could do that if you had somebody, software installer tools could do pretty much the same thing. Drop a bunch of files in a folder and run this script at startup. But this was fairly popular. But what I did with the trial version was I permitted them to create this executable to run this stuff, but it would take a copy of the current date and it would only run on that calendar day. And you could run the heck out of it on that calendar day.
okay,
If your aunt's having a problem on her computer, you could cobble together something and say, here, run this, and I
sure,
make no
sure,
money from it. But if you're in a shop where you're trying to run something in production every night at 11 p.m., well, you're going to have to get the registered version because it'll only run that first time at 11 p.m. And it'll say, sorry, you compiled this on October 4th. It's now October 5th. I can't run it. And I tried to, I tried to juggle a few things. A couple of pieces of software I had just had very simple look in a file for a particular thing or something like that, because the sophisticated people were going to crack whatever I put out. The
Right.
people that I was after were the procrastinators who were not going to crack it anyway. So I got less and less sophisticated about that, just understanding that, yeah, there's people that are going to deprotect this. There's people going to look for deprotected versions. That is not the people that I'm writing this for.
Right.
But
Exactly.
you do need to have something in there, in my opinion, to nudge those procrastinators. So I probably had about a dozen apps, and I've got stories about good users and bad users, and I had users all over the world. I had copies in use in of MailSend in particular. There were copies in for use in very large software organizations, which I thought was very interesting. I had sold at least one copy to part of IBM, one to a part of Microsoft, and one to I think it's is it Wolfram Research? Are they the ones that make Mathematica? I think it was that group.
Could be. Could be. Yep.
And I eventually rewrote it in C Sharp. It's an application called uh, MailSend. That is, it's an application called MailWrench now, and I ended up open sourcing that, and I've open sourced some of the others, but there just came a time where the the interest in all of that sort of waned, and when the internet bubble burst, it became very hard to get traffic to my websites. For a while, there was a site called winsight.com that just brought me all sorts
Yep.
of
Yep.
registered users, and or users who would register rather. And for a while it was a good deal, and then it was in a short time it wasn't, and it just seemed like it was maybe the time for me to get out of that market. And I've thought about dipping my toes again, but the desktop market's tough to get into now. It's the
Sure. Sure.
OSs, Mac OS and Windows are kind of hostile to downloading applications and just running them. And yeah, you know better than I do probably how the mobile app stores work. It's
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
it's their game, not yours. It's not like you can sit down and do your own thing. You got to play by their rules.
Sure.
So I read an article recently about possible resurgence of desktop apps. I saw that LinkedIn, every time I log in now, is trying to, when I log in from a PC, it's trying to get me to download its native app. So if there's a
Right. Right.
resurgence, I might do this. I don't know if I'll charge anything for my software, because I do have some software out there that's just free. Like I have a command line MP3 player called CMD MP3 that has been very popular. I get about 100 downloads of that a month, and it's embedded in somebody's Node.js library for producing sounds. It's if you get the Windows flavor of that, you're getting my console
Well,
dirty C, not written in Rust executable that plays MP3s on Windows.
well, you should inject some MP3 that plays before that MP3.
As an
Like,
advertisement. No,
yeah,
I
you're just like, hello,
no,
this is from Jim Lawler.
I don't plan to make any money off of
Yeah.
that. It's a lot like that hang up program. If you look at the code for it, there's just a couple of API calls that you have to make to play an
Right.
MP3 or a wave on Windows, and that's really all it is a wrapper for this particular API. But some people I think is it's pretty impressive. They've bundled it with their homemade games because they're sound files. It's better for it's smaller. MP3s are smaller than wave files and that sort of
Sure.
thing.
Sure.
So, so gosh, you did turn the tables on me, James, and it's like this was just spring loaded.
Sorry.
I was ready to talk about shareware here.
No, it was good conversation, and I appreciate you
How
having
about you?
me around for it.
Are you interested in doing any more indie dev in whether it's web or mobile or 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 desktop for that matter.
I think if I had the time, I would do more individual, like indie, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
side side of the table web development, or not web development, mobile, but
Do you have any
we'll
mobile
we'll
apps out
see.
there?
Not anymore. No, not that I haven't been, that have outlived Google's time of life that are out there. But no, no.
Do you want to talk at all about those? Because that's similar to dipping your toes
Well, it's
in the shareware market, right?
yeah, well, it's kind of like former employer stuff, so I don't totally want to discuss it, but
That's fine. That's
nothing
fine.
nothing independent, I would say.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, James, is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't covered?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I'd like if you were able to get like some of the local BBS sysops on
Yeah.
a call at some point. I'd like to
Yeah.
be like I don't want to take over the conversation, but I'd love to be involved in those, or at the very least, I'll listen to them. So we got
Yeah.
that going.
I
So,
I'd like to get some of the local guys together.
sure, sure,
They were all well, no, that's not true. I know of they were mostly men. I was going to say I do know of at least one lady that ran her own BBS, but I don't think she's with
sure.
us anymore. But yeah, I plan to have more roundtables, more interviews, individual interviews with sysops, interviews with users, and I can see this going on a while. So I will do that, James. You'll be on the list.
Okay,
All
sounds
right.
great. Sounds great. This
Hey,
has been very interesting. Thank you for bringing back the nostalgia from 30 years ago and making me think about like, hey, what did you do 30 some years ago? I don't know.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
No, it's
that's
all good. It's
that's what I do. All
it's
right. Well, thanks again.
very
It was good
informative.
having
All
you.
right. All right. Thank you, Jim. Take care.
I'd like to thank James again for being on the podcast, and thank you all for listening. Let's do this again soon. Take care.